What if I told you there was a killer in America who didn't just want to murder, he wanted an audience? A killer who taunted the police, mocked the media, and turned his crimes into a twisted game of puzzles and fear. And worst of all, he was never caught. Before we begin, if you're into dark, real stories that expose the most terrifying corners of American history, subscribe now. These are not just stories, they're warnings. Now let's go back. Northern California, late 1960s. America was already on edge. Vietnam protests, civil rights unrest, cultural chaos. And in the middle of it all, a shadow appeared. On December 20th, 1968, two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were parked at a quiet lover's lane near Vallejo, California. Minutes later, both were dead. No robbery, no sexual assault, just execution. Police thought it was an isolated incident. They were wrong. 6 months later, July 4th, 1969, Independence Day, another couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, were sitting in a parked car. A man approached, opened fire, walked away calmly. This time, Michael survived, and that's when everything changed. Because shortly after, newspapers across California received letters. Not apologies, not confessions, threats. The letters described the murders in chilling detail, details only the killer could know. And at the end of one letter, a name. This is the Zodiac speaking. America had just been introduced to its newest nightmare. But Zodiac didn't stop there. He didn't hide. He didn't run. He performed. Zodiac sent more letters, more ciphers, more symbols. He demanded newspapers print his messages, or he promised to kill again. And the media obeyed. Because every time Zodiac wrote, someone died. Then came the ciphers, strange symbols, unbreakable codes. Zodiac claimed they revealed his identity. He claimed they revealed his slaves for the afterlife. And America watched in horror as families, couples, and entire communities realized something terrifying. This killer was smarter than the police, and he loved the attention. September 27th, 1969, Lake Berryessa. A peaceful afternoon, a young couple relaxing near the water. Then a man appeared, wearing a black hood, a white crosshair symbol on his chest, holding a knife. He tied them up and stabbed them. Before leaving, he wrote a message on their car door, listing dates of his murders. This time, he didn't just kill. He signed his work. Zodiac wasn't just murdering people. He was writing a story, and America was trapped inside it. Police chased suspects, psychics made predictions, the FBI got involved, but Zodiac stayed one step ahead. Because the scariest part? He could be anyone. Your neighbor, your coworker, the man sitting next to you on the bus, and he wanted you to know that. But here's where things get even darker. Because Zodiac claimed he killed 37 people. Officially, police only confirmed 5. So the question is, was Zodiac lying, or is America still underestimating how many people he actually murdered? Soon, we dive deep into the ciphers, the decoded messages, and the horrifying truth hidden inside Zodiac's puzzles. Messages meant for you. And once you hear what he really wrote, you'll never look at unsolved cases the same way again. The Zodiac Killer didn't just want to kill. He wanted to be understood. Or at least, he wanted people to try. On August 1st, 1969, 3 major California newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, received nearly identical letters.
Inside each envelope was a handwritten message and a cipher. Zodiac demanded the newspapers print the cipher on the front page. If they didn't, he promised to go on a killing spree. The media complied, and just like that, the entire United States was staring at a puzzle written by a murderer. The first cipher, 408 symbols of fear. The cipher was made of strange symbols, circles, triangles, crossed lines. Zodiac claimed it revealed his identity. Police tried to crack it. So did the FBI. They failed. But then, 2 civilians cracked it. A high school teacher and his wife, Donald and Betty Hardin. What they uncovered shocked the nation. The decoded message didn't reveal Zodiac's name. Instead, it revealed his mind. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. America realized something terrifying. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about anger. This was about pleasure. Zodiac believed that killing people would give him slaves in the afterlife. He saw himself as something beyond human, and he wanted everyone to know it. But Zodiac wasn't impressed. Instead of disappearing, Zodiac mocked the police. He sent another letter, another cipher. This time, he said something chilling. "By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you?" This new cipher, later known as the 340 cipher, was longer, more complex, more arrogant. Zodiac claimed it did contain his identity. Police tried again. Cryptographers tried. The FBI tried. They failed. For over 50 years, no one could crack it. That failure haunted American law enforcement because every unsolved symbol felt like Zodiac laughing at them. Zodiac escalates. On October 11, 1969, Zodiac attacked again, this time in San Francisco. He shot taxi driver Paul Stein in cold blood. Then he did something no one expected. He stayed. Witnesses saw him calmly wiping the cab, removing fingerprints. Then Zodiac tore off a piece of Stein's shirt. Days later, that bloody fabric arrived in the mail, sent by Zodiac himself. Proof, confirmation, a message to the police that said,
"I was here, and I left when I wanted." This wasn't just murder. This was domination. The city panics. Police released a composite sketch based on witness descriptions. For the first time, America had a face to fear. A white male, short hair, glasses. Ordinary. Too ordinary. And that made it worse. Because Zodiac could blend in anywhere. Schools canceled bus routes. Parents escorted children everywhere. People stopped trusting strangers. Zodiac had turned fear into a weapon. And then, silence. After 1970, Zodiac's letters slowed, then stopped. No arrest, no body, no confession, just questions. Did he die? Did he move? Or did he simply stop writing? And then, decades later, something unbelievable happened. In 2020, the 340 cipher was finally cracked, after more than half a century. And what it revealed was not a confession, not a name, but a final insult. We break down the decoded 340 cipher word by word and expose why Zodiac's final message may prove he never intended to be caught. And once you hear it, you'll understand why this case still terrifies America today. For over 50 years, the Zodiac Killer's most infamous message sat unsolved. A wall of symbols, no meaning, no mercy. The 340 cipher became a symbol of failure for police, for cryptographers, and for the idea that every monster eventually slips up. But in December 2020, everything changed. A team of independent codebreakers, not the FBI, not the police, finally cracked it. And America leaned in, expecting the truth, a name, a location, a confession. What they got instead was far more disturbing. The decoded message. When the cipher was finally translated, this is what Zodiac said. "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That was not me on the TV show. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." No name, no remorse, no fear, just mockery. Zodiac wasn't hiding anymore. He was flexing. He was telling America something chilling. You never understood me, and you never will. This wasn't a man trying to escape justice. This was a man convinced he was untouchable. The psychological trap. Experts believe Zodiac designed the 340 cipher to do one thing: waste of time. While police chased symbols, Zodiac watched the chaos he created. He inserted deliberate errors, false patterns, dead ends. The cipher wasn't meant to be solved quickly. It was meant to humiliate. Zodiac wanted investigators obsessing over codes instead of suspects. And it worked. Years passed. Leads went cold. Witnesses died. Zodiac faded into legend. A killer who studied the system. Zodiac wasn't reckless. He understood police procedures. He understood media psychology. He understood fear. When he killed Paul Stein, he knew witnesses would see him. When he mailed the bloody shirt, he knew it would confirm his control. Every move was calculated. And here's the scariest part. Zodiac made mistakes, but the system made bigger ones. The near miss. One police officer stopped a man matching Zodiac's description near the Stein crime scene, but because of a miscommunication, the suspect was released. That man was never identified. Think about that. Zodiac may have been physically stopped and then allowed to walk away. If that moment had gone differently, there might not be a Zodiac mystery today. The letters that changed tone. As time passed, Zodiac's letters grew angrier, less playful, more desperate. He complained about lack of attention, threatened mass murder, claimed bomb designs. This raised a terrifying question. Was Zodiac losing control, or was he evolving? Because killers don't always stop. Sometimes they just stop writing. The silence that followed. After 1974, Zodiac vanished. No confirmed murders, no letters, no trace. But silence doesn't mean peace. Some believe he was arrested for another crime. Some believe he died. Others believe he simply aged out. But there's another theory, that Zodiac didn't disappear. He blended in and lived a normal life. Imagine that. A man who terrorized America, going home every night, watching the news, laughing as people debated who he was, and knowing they would never prove it. We dive into the most dangerous suspects ever linked to Zodiac. Men with violent pasts, disturbing behavior, and evidence so close it feels unreal. And once you hear how close police may have come, you'll realize this case wasn't unsolved because of lack of suspects. It was unsolved because the truth was too uncomfortable. When the Zodiac Killer vanished, he didn't leave behind answers. He left behind suspects. Over the decades, dozens of men were investigated, some briefly, some obsessively. Most were ruled out.
But a few names refuse to die, names that still divide detectives, journalists, and true crime experts to this day. Let's start with the one you've probably heard before, Arthur Lee Allen. If the Zodiac case had a main character, this would be him. Arthur Lee Allen was a former elementary school teacher living in California during the murders. He had a criminal record, he was violent, and disturbingly, he was obsessed with Zodiac. Allen told friends he wanted to call himself Zodiac.
He owned the same brand of boots that left footprints at a crime scene. He had bomb-making materials similar to Zodiac's designs. Even more chilling, on the day of the Lake Berryessa stabbing, Allen was reportedly nearby. Police searched his home. They found knives. They found disturbing writings. They found reasons to worry. But they didn't find enough. DNA evidence later failed to conclusively match him to Zodiac's letters, and without that final proof, Arthur Lee Allen walked free, until he died in 1992, taking his secrets with him. A question that still haunts investigators. If Allen wasn't Zodiac, why did so much line up? And if he was Zodiac, why couldn't police prove it? That question alone keeps this case alive. Lawrence Kane. Another suspect emerged quietly but dangerously. Lawrence Kane had a history of violence against women. He lived near several Zodiac crime scenes. He reportedly knew victims. After a serious head injury, Kane's personality changed. He became impulsive, aggressive, unpredictable. Handwriting experts noted similarities between Kane's writing and Zodiac's letters. Witnesses placed him in suspicious locations at suspicious times. But once again, nothing airtight. No confession, no definitive forensic link. Just shadows.
The problem with Zodiac suspects. Here's the truth most people don't want to admit. The Zodiac case suffers from too much coincidence. Many suspects fit some of the evidence, none fit all of it. And that raises a terrifying possibility. What if Zodiac wasn't a criminal mastermind? What if he was just lucky? The composite sketch controversy. The famous Zodiac sketch is burned into American pop culture, but it may have done more harm than good. The sketch was based on limited witness accounts, at night, from a distance, under stress. That image may have narrowed police vision instead of expanding it. Anyone who didn't resemble the sketch was mentally dismissed. Anyone who did became a fixation. And Zodiac, who understood psychology, may have counted on that. Could Zodiac have been multiple people? Some investigators believe Zodiac wasn't one man, but a persona, a shared identity, or an evolving copycat phenomenon. Different handwriting, different killing styles, different confidence levels. Was Zodiac adapting, or was America chasing a myth that grew bigger than reality? The case that refuses to close. Even today, new suspects appear. Books claim solutions, documentaries promise answers, online sleuths argue endlessly. But no arrest has ever stood, and the official Zodiac case remains open, unsolved. Because the most disturbing truth might be this: Zodiac didn't outsmart the police, he outlasted them. We uncover the mistakes, miscommunications, and missed chances that may have allowed Zodiac to escape justice, including moments where police were seconds away from stopping him. And once you see how close they came, you'll start asking a terrifying question. Did Zodiac survive because he was smart, or because the system failed? The Zodiac Killer didn't vanish because he was invisible. He vanished because the system cracked first. To understand how one of America's most notorious killers escaped justice, we have to confront an uncomfortable truth. Zodiac was stopped and then released.
The night everything went wrong. October 11th, 1969. After murdering taxi driver Paul Stein in San Francisco, Zodiac didn't flee in panic. He walked calmly. Witnesses, teenagers watching from an apartment window, called police and gave a description. A white male, short hair, glasses, walking north. But here's the mistake that changed history. The police radio call mistakenly described the suspect as black. 2 officers responded. They saw a man matching the original witness description, white, glasses, calm, walking away from the scene. They slowed their patrol car. They looked at him, and they let him go, because he didn't match the radio call. That man was never identified.
And Zodiac disappeared into the night. One error, infinite consequences. That single miscommunication may be the most costly mistake in American true crime history. Think about it. Zodiac may have been face to face with police. Not running, not hiding, just walking home. And because of one wrong word, he lived. A system that couldn't keep up. Zodiac operated across multiple jurisdictions: Vallejo, Napa, San Francisco. Different police departments, different evidence systems, different priorities. There was no unified task force in the early years. Information moved slowly. Leads were lost in paperwork. By the time patterns were clear, Zodiac was already adapting. He knew where police were weak, and he exploited it. The evidence that didn't exist yet. DNA technology was decades away. Fingerprint databases were limited. Handwriting analysis was subjective.
Police relied heavily on witness memory, one of the most unreliable forms of evidence. Zodiac understood this. That's why he wore disguises. That's why he wiped surfaces. That's why he taunted investigators instead of confessing. He was playing a game where the rules favored him. The FBI steps in too late. The FBI analyzed Zodiac's letters. They studied his psychology. They created profiles. But profiling doesn't catch killers. Evidence does. And Zodiac left just enough clues to create confusion, but never enough to convict. By the time law enforcement coordination improved in the 1970s, Zodiac had already gone quiet. The cost of delay. Witnesses aged, memories faded, suspects died. Arthur Lee Allen passed away. Others disappeared into obscurity. Every year without an arrest strengthened Zodiac's greatest weapon, time. And time erased the edges of the truth. The unspoken fear. Here's what investigators rarely say out loud. If Zodiac were active today, he'd be caught. Cell phone data, surveillance cameras, DNA databases. But in the late 1960s, he existed in a perfect storm, a moment in American history where chaos, fear, and limited technology gave him exactly what he needed, an exit. And that raises a disturbing possibility. What if Zodiac didn't stop killing? What if he just stopped being Zodiac, changed methods, changed locations, changed his name?
We explore the theory that chills investigators the most. The idea that Zodiac may have committed other murders that were never linked to him. Murders that still sit in cold case files, waiting. And once you see the patterns, you may realize the Zodiac story didn't end in the 1970s. It just went underground. Officially, the Zodiac Killer is responsible for 5 confirmed murders. But even police don't fully believe that number, because Zodiac himself claimed something far more disturbing. I have killed 37 people. Most investigators dismissed it as a lie, an ego boost, a scare tactic. But what if it wasn't? The problem with confirmed victims. Zodiac's confirmed attacks follow a pattern: young couples, isolated locations, sudden violence. But patterns can be broken, especially by a killer who wants confusion. Several cold cases across California and even beyond share chilling similarities with Zodiac's known crimes. Different weapons, different locations, same feeling. The Oceanside Murder. In 1964, Sherry Jo Bates, a college student, was found brutally murdered near Riverside City College. At first, it seemed unrelated. But then, letters arrived. Typed letters sent to police and newspapers. The tone? Mocking, confident, cruel. Sound familiar? Years later, a handwritten note surfaced, eerily similar to Zodiac's style. Some experts believe Sherry Jo Bates may have been Zodiac's first victim. If that's true, the Zodiac timeline begins earlier than anyone thought. The highway killings. Throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, several murders occurred near highways and rest stops.
Victims found shot, sometimes stabbed, often left in public places. Some investigators noticed overlaps, geography, timing, methods. But without letters, these cases were never officially connected. And Zodiac knew that letters were what tied crimes together. So what happens when he chooses silence instead? Zodiac without the signature. Criminologists believe serial killers sometimes abandon their signature to avoid detection. Zodiac may have done exactly that. No letters, no symbols, no taunts, just murder. If true, then Zodiac didn't stop killing, he just stopped performing, and that makes him harder to see. The copycat problem. Another nightmare scenario. Zodiac inspired others. His letters were printed nationwide. His symbol became infamous. What if some murders attributed to Zodiac were copycats? And what if some Zodiac murders were dismissed as random violence? That overlap creates a blind spot, one where truth disappears. The missing victims. There are victims whose families still believe Zodiac was responsible. Cases dismissed, files closed, questions unanswered. Because without a confession or DNA, these families will never know, and Zodiac may have counted on that. Why this theory terrifies investigators. If Zodiac killed more than officially confirmed, then the case isn't just unsolved, it's incomplete. It means the real damage was never fully measured, and it means America may have underestimated one of its most dangerous predators. Here's the chilling truth. Zodiac didn't need to kill often. He only needed to kill memorable. The fear did the rest, and fear spreads faster than facts.
We step inside the mind of the Zodiac Killer. His psychology, his ego, and the traits that allowed him to manipulate an entire nation without ever being caught. And once you understand how he thought, you'll realize something unsettling. Zodiac wasn't unique. He was a prototype. To understand why the Zodiac Killer was never caught, you don't start with evidence. You start with ego. Because Zodiac didn't kill for necessity. He killed for recognition. And that tells us everything. A killer who needed an audience. Most serial killers try to hide. Zodiac did the opposite. He wrote letters. He sent puzzles. He demanded front-page coverage. This wasn't just violence, it was branding. Zodiac created a persona powerful enough to survive even after he stopped killing. And that takes a very specific psychological profile. Experts believe Zodiac showed strong signs of narcissistic personality traits, grandiose sense of importance, obsession with control, deep need for validation, total lack of empathy.
But narcissism alone doesn't explain the violence. Zodiac wasn't impulsive, he was methodical. The God complex. Zodiac repeatedly referred to the afterlife. He claimed his victims would become his slaves in paradise. That language matters. It suggests delusional superiority, the belief that he was above normal moral rules. In his mind, he wasn't committing murder, he was collecting. And that mindset is terrifying because it removes guilt entirely. Why Zodiac loved puzzles. The ciphers weren't just taunts, they were tests. Zodiac wanted to prove he was smarter than everyone else, especially the police. Every unsolved code reinforced his identity. I am untouchable. Even when ciphers were cracked, he dismissed them. He always needed the upper hand. Which tells us something critical. Zodiac feared irrelevance more than capture. Control through fear. Zodiac didn't need to kill often.
Fear did the work for him. Parents kept children inside. Couples stopped going out. Entire cities felt hunted. That level of control is intoxicating to someone with power fantasies, and Zodiac knew exactly how to trigger it. Random victims, public places, unpredictable timing. Anyone could be next. Everyone felt watched. Why he may have stopped. One of the biggest questions in the case is why Zodiac went silent. Psychologically, there are 3 likely reasons. Loss of attention. Media interest faded, and without attention, the thrill vanished. Fear of exposure. As technology improved, the risk grew. Life changes. Marriage, career, age, responsibilities. Serial killers don't always end dramatically. Sometimes they just age out, and that's deeply unsettling. The mask never comes off. What makes Zodiac different isn't just what he did, it's that he never slipped. No emotional confessions, no desperate mistakes, no breakdown. He stayed in character until the end.
That suggests discipline, and discipline suggests something even scarier. Zodiac may have been highly functional. A job, a family, a routine, someone no one suspected. The final psychological truth. Zodiac didn't want to be caught, but he wanted to be remembered. And in that sense, he won. But here's the irony. His greatest fear, being forgotten, may still come true. Because time doesn't honor monsters forever, unless we keep asking the right questions. We investigate the letters that may not have been written by Zodiac at all, possible hoaxes, forgeries, and misinformation that may have poisoned the case from the inside. And once you see how much fake evidence entered the investigation, you'll start wondering if the truth was buried on purpose. Everything we think we know about the Zodiac Killer comes from one source, his letters. But what if some of them weren't his? That question has haunted investigators for decades, because if fake letters entered the case, then the entire investigation may have been corrupted from the inside. The power of a postmark. Zodiac understood something most killers don't. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist. His murders became legendary because he documented them, described details, sent proof, demanded publication. But once the media showed it would print anything Zodiac claimed to write,
others noticed, and that's when the problem began. The first doubts. As Zodiac's fame grew, police began receiving letters that felt off. The handwriting didn't quite match. The tone felt exaggerated. The details were vague. Some messages threatened mass murder without follow-through. Others referenced crimes that couldn't be verified. Investigators began quietly categorizing letters: confirmed Zodiac, possibly Zodiac, likely hoax. But the public was never told which was which, and that secrecy had consequences. Why hoax letters are dangerous. Every fake letter wastes time. Police chase false leads, resources get stretched, real evidence gets buried, and Zodiac may have welcomed this chaos because hoaxes helped him without him lifting a finger. They amplified fear, they muddied timelines, they made profiling harder. In a strange way, hoaxers became Zodiac's unpaid accomplices. The 1974 letters. After years of silence, letters resurfaced in 1974. They referenced movies, they criticized pop culture, they lacked specific crime details. Some investigators believe these letters were Zodiac returning. Others believe they were opportunists riding the legend. Even today, there's no consensus, which raises a terrifying possibility. What if the real Zodiac stopped writing years earlier, and everything after was noise? The problem with belief. Here's the uncomfortable truth.
Once a myth is born, people want to participate. Some crave attention. Some want to feel powerful. Some just want to be part of history. The Zodiac created a vacuum, and human nature rushed to fill it. And police, overwhelmed and cautious, couldn't always tell the difference. When evidence becomes theater. Media coverage blurred lines. Headlines treated every letter as gospel. Talk shows speculated wildly. Public fear intensified, and Zodiac, real or not, grew larger than life. At some point, the story stopped being about murders and became about the idea of Zodiac. That's when the case lost clarity. A case built on paper. Unlike other serial killers, Zodiac left little physical evidence. No confirmed DNA, no confirmed fingerprints, no confirmed confession. What remained was paper, ink, symbols, words. And if some of those words were lies, then parts of the case may be fiction. That's not just frustrating, it's dangerous. The question no one wants to answer. What if investigators spent decades chasing the wrong version of Zodiac? What if the killer's true behavior was simpler, quieter, less theatrical? What if the real man hid behind the myth? Because if that's true, then Zodiac didn't just escape justice, he rewrote reality. We examined the media's role in turning Zodiac into a legend, and whether the coverage that helped catch him may have actually helped him disappear. And once you see how fear was marketed, you'll realize Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a media creation. The Zodiac Killer didn't rise in silence. He rose in headlines. Newspapers printed his words. Television debated his motives. Radio hosts speculated about his identity. And every time his name was spoken, Zodiac won. A perfect storm of attention. The late 1960s were a turning point for American media. Crime reporting became sensational. Competition for readers was fierce. Fear sold papers. When Zodiac demanded front-page coverage, editors faced an impossible choice: print the letters and risk encouraging a killer, or ignore them and risk more deaths. They chose to publish, and in doing so, they gave Zodiac exactly what he wanted. Zodiac as a character. Zodiac didn't feel real. He felt cinematic, a symbol, a villain, a mystery. Media coverage turned him into a character people followed, like a dark TV series unfolding in real time. Each letter became an episode, each murder a cliffhanger, and America couldn't look away.
when reporting becomes participation. Zodiac didn't just write letters, he directed coverage. He told newspapers where to publish, he criticized mistakes, he demanded recognition, and shockingly, editors complied. The line between reporting and participation blurred, and Zodiac learned something crucial. He could control the narrative. Fear as a business. As Zodiac's legend grew, fear became profitable. Papers sold more copies, TV ratings climbed, public obsession intensified. But fear has a cost. It distorts perception. People saw Zodiac everywhere. Ordinary men became suspects. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. And real investigative focus began to fracture. The long-term damage. Years later, documentaries, books, and films kept the story alive. Each retelling added drama. Each theory added confusion. Zodiac became less a case and more a franchise. And the more he was mythologized, the harder he became to catch, because you can't arrest a legend. The killer who outsmarted the spotlight. Most criminals collapse under attention. Zodiac thrived on it. He knew the media wouldn't stop covering him, and he used that certainty to vanish. Once the spotlight was secure, he no longer needed to perform. Silence became his final move. A warning we ignored. Zodiac taught a dangerous lesson. Attention can be weaponized, and that lesson didn't die with him. Future killers learned from Zodiac.
They wrote manifestos. They courted cameras. They chased notoriety. Zodiac was the prototype. The question that still lingers: if the media hadn't printed the letters, would Zodiac have continued? Or would he have faded into obscurity? We'll never know. But what we do know is this: Zodiac didn't just kill people. He manipulated a system that was never designed to resist him. We explore the modern investigation, new DNA techniques, renewed interest, and the controversial claims that Zodiac may finally have been identified. And once you hear how close or how far we really are, you'll understand why this case still refuses to die. For decades, the Zodiac Killer belonged to the past. Faded files, yellowing letters, retired detectives. But technology doesn't forget. And in the 21st century, the hunt for Zodiac was quietly reborn. DNA changes everything. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, forensic science made a leap. DNA profiling became precise. Databases expanded. Cold cases started reopening. Investigators believed Zodiac's letters, licked stamps, sealed envelopes, might hold the key. Tiny traces of saliva, microscopic skin cells. If Zodiac left DNA behind, modern science could finally name him. Or so they hoped. The disappointment. Early DNA testing produced partial results, fragments, inconclusive profiles. Some tests suggested the DNA may not even belong to Zodiac, possibly from a newspaper worker or postal handler. That revelation shook the case. Because if the DNA wasn't Zodiac's, then decades of assumptions collapsed. Once again, the truth slipped away. A new generation of sleuths. As law enforcement struggled, civilians stepped in. Online investigators, true crime researchers, retired code breakers. The internet revived the case. Forums analyzed handwriting. Podcasts dissected timelines. Crowdsourced investigations gained momentum. Some of this helped, some of it hurt. But Zodiac was no longer controlled by official silence. The 2018 shockwave.
In 2018, authorities used genetic genealogy to catch the Golden State Killer, a serial predator hiding for decades, exposed through family DNA databases. The message was clear: no one is invisible anymore. Suddenly, everyone asked the same question: could Zodiac be next? Hope rises, then complicates. Investigators revisited old evidence. They compared handwriting again. They reviewed suspects' relatives. They tested new samples. But Zodiac wasn't like other cases. There was no confirmed DNA baseline, no verified biological link to a suspect.
And without that, genealogy hits a wall. The 2021 claim. Then came a bombshell. A group of independent investigators claimed they had identified Zodiac. They named a suspect. They released a documentary. They declared the mystery solved. But law enforcement didn't agree. No arrest followed, no charges filed, no official confirmation. The claim sparked debate, but not closure. Once again, Zodiac hovered just out of reach. Why the case is still open? Despite modern tools, Zodiac remains elusive because evidence was mishandled early. Critical moments were missed. Technology arrived too late. And most importantly, Zodiac planned for this. He minimized physical contact. He avoided leaving biological traces. He relied on misdirection. He wasn't just killing, he was future-proofing. The uncomfortable truth: Zodiac may never be identified. Not because he was perfect, but because the window closed. Witnesses are gone. Suspects are dead. Memories have faded. Time, once again, is on his side. But the story isn't over. We examine the most controversial modern suspect, the man some believe fits too well to be ignored. And once you hear the evidence stacked together, you'll understand why some investigators say if Zodiac had a name, this would be it. Every unsolved case eventually attracts one name that refuses to disappear. For the Zodiac Killer, that name is Arthur Lee Allen. Again. Even decades after his death, investigators keep circling back to him, not because of rumor, but because of how disturbingly much lines up. Too much. The man at the center of the storm. Arthur Lee Allen was born in 1933 and lived in California during the Zodiac murders. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't invisible. He was ordinary, and that's what made him dangerous. Allen worked as a school teacher before being fired for inappropriate behavior with students. He had a criminal record. He was volatile, and he spoke openly about dark fantasies. But what truly alarmed investigators came from people who knew him, the confessions that weren't confessions. Allen told friends he wanted to call himself Zodiac. He spoke about hunting couples. He described killing as a thrill. One friend later told police that Allen had discussed using a flashlight taped to a gun, a detail matching Zodiac's method at Lake Herman Road. That wasn't public knowledge at the time. That detail mattered. The physical evidence. Allen owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch featuring the same crosshair symbol used in the killer's letters. He lived near multiple crime scenes. He was reportedly in the Lake Berryessa area on the day of the stabbing. Investigators searched his home. They found weapons. They found disturbing writings. They found bomb diagrams similar to Zodiac's. What they didn't find was the one thing they needed: proof.
The DNA problem. Years later, DNA testing complicated everything. Allen's DNA did not conclusively match DNA taken from Zodiac letters. But here's the catch. Investigators aren't even certain the DNA from the letters belongs to Zodiac. It may belong to a postal worker, or a newspaper employee. So a non-match doesn't equal innocence, it equals uncertainty. And uncertainty has haunted this case from the start. Handwriting and eyewitnesses. Some handwriting experts said Allen's writing matched Zodiac's. Others disagreed. Eyewitnesses gave mixed statements. Some said Allen resembled the Zodiac sketch. Others said he didn't. And once again, the case fractured under conflicting interpretations. Why he was never charged. Police needed more than suspicion. They needed something undeniable. A confession, a verified DNA match, a witness willing to testify. They never got it. Arthur Lee Allen died in 1992, never charged, never convicted. And with his death, the case lost its most tangible target.
The lingering question. Here's what makes Allen so haunting. If he wasn't Zodiac, then why does his life overlap the case at so many critical points? And if he was Zodiac, did he escape justice simply because the evidence wasn't strong enough, or because the system hesitated? The possibility no one likes. Some investigators believe Allen was Zodiac. Others believe he was a red herring. But nearly all agree on one thing. If Zodiac was ever going to be arrested, Arthur Lee Allen was the moment. And that moment passed. We explore the final theories, including the possibility that Zodiac wasn't one man at all, but a shifting identity that evolved over time. And once you hear those theories, you may realize that solving the Zodiac case might be impossible, not because of missing evidence, but because we've been asking the wrong question all along. What if the Zodiac Killer was never meant to be solved? Not because police failed, not because evidence was lost, but because the truth itself is more complicated than we're willing to accept. The one-man myth. Most people imagine Zodiac as a single, brilliant predator. One face, one mind, one voice. But some investigators believe that assumption may be the biggest mistake of all.
Because when you examine the case closely, really closely, things don't always line up. Different handwriting styles, different tones in letters, different levels of confidence. What if Zodiac wasn't one man, but an identity? The evolving persona theory. This theory suggests Zodiac began as a single killer, but the persona outgrew him. Once the symbol became famous, others may have stepped in. Copycats, attention seekers, people with their own violent urges. They didn't need to kill to keep the myth alive. They only needed to write, and the media couldn't tell the difference. Multiple hands, one name. Some letters show sophistication, others feel sloppy. Some demonstrate deep planning, others feel rushed, emotional, almost desperate. That inconsistency raises uncomfortable questions. Was Zodiac aging? Was he unraveling? Or were multiple people contributing to the legend, intentionally or not? Why this theory makes sense. Zodiac's power came from confusion. Multiple authorship creates chaos. It makes profiling unreliable. It muddies timelines. It fractures investigations. If Zodiac became a shared identity, then the real killer could hide behind noise, and that noise protected him better than silence ever could. The darkest possibility. Here's the theory that truly unsettles investigators. The original Zodiac may have stopped killing early, but the persona continued, which means some letters attributed to Zodiac may have been written by someone else, and some murders attributed to Zodiac may not have been his. That doesn't make the case simpler, it makes it nearly impossible. Why police never publicly endorsed this?
Law enforcement relies on clarity. Admitting Zodiac may not have been one person undermines decades of work. It complicates prosecutions. It confuses the public. It raises more questions than answers. So, officially, Zodiac remains one killer. Unofficially, doubt never left the room. A case built on assumptions. True crime history is full of cases shaped by early conclusions. Once a narrative forms, everything bends to fit it. Zodiac was framed as a mastermind, but what if he was simply the first voice in a chorus of chaos? What if America wasn't chasing a ghost, but a crowd? Why this might be the final answer? If Zodiac was a shifting identity, then there may never be a single solution, no dramatic arrest, no final confession.
Just fragments of truth scattered across decades. And that may be why the case still grips us, because it reflects something terrifying, that sometimes evil doesn't wear one face, it wears many. We confront the final question, the one that lingers long after the evidence ends. What does the Zodiac case say about America itself, fear, obsession, the need for answers, and why some mysteries refuse to be solved, not because they can't be, but because we're not ready for what they reveal? By now, the Zodiac Killer feels less like a person and more like a mirror, a reflection of fear, obsession, and the uncomfortable truth that some questions never get answers. Because the Zodiac case isn't just about who committed the murders, it's about how America reacted. A nation that needed a monster. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, America was already fractured. War overseas, protests at home, trust in institutions collapsing, and into that chaos stepped the Zodiac, a single figure onto whom fear could be projected. He gave anxiety a name, and once he did, America couldn't let go. The obsession with closure.
We crave endings. We want handcuffs, courtrooms, confessions. But Zodiac denied all of that. No arrest, no trial, no certainty. And that unresolved tension kept the case alive, because unsolved stories don't fade, they linger. Fear became part of daily life. Zodiac changed behavior. Parents stopped letting kids walk alone. Couples avoided quiet places. Strangers looked suspicious. The killer didn't need to strike often. Fear did the work. And that's the real damage, long after the murder stopped. The media and the audience. Zodiac needed attention, but attention needs an audience. Every printed letter, every broadcast speculation, every modern documentary. We didn't just observe the Zodiac story, we participated in it. And that complicates our role, because fascination can unintentionally reward violence. Why we still talk about him. There are other killers with higher body counts, more brutality, more victims, yet Zodiac remains uniquely compelling. Why?
Because he escaped. He broke the unspoken rule that evil must eventually be punished. And that unsettles us. The cost of not knowing. Families of victims never got answers, no confirmation, no justice, just silence. And that silence became part of the American true crime psyche, a reminder that systems fail, evidence fades, and truth isn't guaranteed. Zodiac as a warning. Zodiac wasn't just a criminal, he was a lesson about media responsibility, about investigative limits, about how myths can overshadow facts, and about how easily fear spreads when certainty disappears. The question that still echoes. If Zodiac were identified tomorrow, would it satisfy us? Or has the mystery itself become the point? Because sometimes what haunts us isn't the monster,
It's the gap where answers should be. The Zodiac case forces us to confront a truth we don't like. Not every story ends cleanly. Not every killer is caught. And sometimes, history leaves us with questions instead of closure. But the story isn't quite over yet. Because we bring everything together, the evidence, the theories, the mistakes, and confront the final possibility. What if Zodiac was hiding in plain sight all along, and we missed him because we wanted the legend more than the truth? This is the conclusion, and it may change how you see unsolved cases forever. The Zodiac Killer was never caught. No handcuffs, no courtroom, no final confession. Just silence. And maybe that was the plan all along. Hiding in plain sight.
When investigators revisit the Zodiac case today, one thought keeps resurfacing. What if the answer was always there, but too ordinary to notice? Zodiac didn't live on the margins. He didn't vanish into the wilderness. He likely worked a job, paid bills, spoke politely to neighbors. Because the most effective disguise isn't darkness, it's normalcy. And that's what makes this case so disturbing. The legend became the shield. Over time, Zodiac transformed from a man into a myth, a genius, a mastermind, a criminal larger than life. But legends are hard to arrest. They blur details, they inflate intelligence, they distract from simple truths. The more mythical Zodiac became, the easier it was for a real person to hide behind the image. And that may be the greatest misdirection of all. The evidence we'll never have. Critical moments passed, witnesses aged, suspects died, evidence degraded. And once that window closed, it never reopened. Modern technology arrived too late. The answers didn't disappear, they expired. What if we're asking the wrong question? We keep asking, who was the Zodiac Killer? But maybe the better question is, why do some crimes resist closure?
Because Zodiac exposed something uncomfortable. Justice depends on timing. And when timing fails, truth becomes optional. The victims, not the myth. It's easy to get lost in theories, names, codes, suspects. But the real story belongs to the victims. 5 confirmed lives ended, families left without answers, a generation shaped by fear. Zodiac didn't just kill people, he stole certainty, and that theft never gets returned. The case that changed true crime forever. Zodiac reshaped investigations. Police procedures evolved. Media ethics were questioned. Future cases learned from his manipulation. In that sense, Zodiac's legacy isn't just terror, it's transformation. A reminder that criminals adapt and systems must adapt faster. The final possibility. There's one last thought investigators rarely voice out loud. Zodiac may have died believing he won, that his secret stayed buried. But here's the truth. He didn't control the ending. We do. By remembering the victims, by learning from the failures, by refusing to glorify the myth. Because the moment we stop chasing the legend, we start honoring the truth. No closure, only awareness. Some mysteries don't end, they warn. And the Zodiac case warns us that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it writes letters. Sometimes it hides in crowds.
Sometimes it grows old and fades away unnoticed. And that's the hardest ending to accept. If you stayed through all 14 parts, you didn't just watch a story, you faced one of America's darkest questions. And there are more stories like this. stories that challenge what we think we know. So if you want to keep exploring the cases that refuse to stay buried, subscribe, stay curious, and never stop asking questions. Because some truths only surface when we're willing to look into the dark.